So my name is Armiero and I am the director of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. We are in Berlin and we are at the Anthropocene campus at the House of Kultur in Berlin, and this is a very interesting project. Here we are pretty much 100 students, PhD and postdoctoral fellows from all over the world, and I believe almost 30 or 40 instructors from several disciplines and again from all the world. And we are trying to build an Anthropocene campus. So we are trying to build a curriculum to teach and to understand what the Anthropocene is or maybe might be, and try to build some kind of knowledge which can help us to navigate in this kind of difficult time. First of all, the Environmental Humanities Laboratory is one of the institutions which are organizing this event. So we have been part of the project since the beginning, because actually we really share this commitment to build some kind of post-disciplinary curriculum for the Anthropocene. Here I am part of a triad, because the Anthropocene campus works in this way. There are 3 instructors pretty much for each course, and what is really nice about this is that these 3 instructors, they come from different disciplinary backgrounds. So I am part of a triad working on filtering the Anthropocene. Our idea is that the Anthropocene is a concept, of course, but it can be, read in a different way on the base of your own filter. And the filter can be, your disciplinary filter, but it's also, class, gender, race, even historical, conditions. So this is what we are trying to do in the triad in which I am part of. And I am with Amita Bhaviskar, an urban sociologist from India, and Will Steffen, and probably I don't need to explain that Will is actually one of the crucial figures in the very making of the Anthropocene concept, no? And so I am very happy, actually, very grateful to be here. I am an environmental historian, and even if by training I am actually, my PhD is in economic history. Well, as you may know, in Italy, as in many European countries, at least at that time, I am not so young, there was no environmental history PhD program. So for me, there was no other option. And according to me, economic history was pretty close to environmental history, at least on some respect. So I have a background in economic history, but I think that I became an environmental historian then. So my first kind of research interest was on the history of forests in 19th century Italy, and especially I was working on the transition from common property to private property, the enclosing process in the 19th century, and also the overlapping between I would say, the political time and the environmental time. So how, for instance, the unification of a country like Italy in the 19th century was interacting with the ecology on the ground, and the way in which the politics of nation state can interfere and build in a way dialectically with the nation state building. And this kind of research is also at the very basis of my recent published book on the history of mountains in modern Italy, which was published in 2011 by White Horse Press. And the book is especially about the mutual constituency of nation and nature, in my case in Italy, and I have been using the mountains as I would say, a case study to understand this I would say, strange relationship between nation and nature. Apart from this kind of research that I would define as the politicization of landscape, I am also interested in political ecology. I think that in the last few years I became more and more interested in this field. I was very lucky because I had the possibility to work in Barcelona with Joan Martínez Salier. Joan Martínez Salier is probably one of the founding fathers of political ecology, especially in Europe, even if he is also very influential in Latin America. His book, The Environmentalism of the Poor, is a textbook, is really a classic in the field. So I was working with him for 2 years, and I hope that I was able to learn something. This is at least what I am trying to tell him, that yes, I was able to learn something. And so I became interested in political ecology, and especially in the waste issues. Yeah, you know, I am from Italy, I am from Naples, Campania, and as you may know, Naples has become an icon of urban disaster in terms of management of waste. So I really felt some kind of, I would say, moral obligation as a scholar to be engaged in this issue. So I started working on garbage as a political ecologist. I am writing right now a book on the political ecology of waste in Naples, Italy, with a colleague, an ecological economist. I am very happy to do this in collaboration with somebody from another discipline again. And well, just to tell you the last part of my research interest, I said, you know, the politicization of landscape, the relationship between nation and nature, the political ecology of waste, and generally speaking of the issue of environmental justice. I published recently a book with Lise Cedrets from Brazil, A History of Environmentalism, Local Struggles, Global Stories. So this is the kind of thing that I am doing in political ecology. The third field of research is the environmental history of migration. I think that this is something that environmental historians have not been looked at for a long time. If you go online and you look, you know, in the database of environmental history and you look for migration, you can find any kind of birds, but no human beings. So I believe that instead we need to look at the connection between migration and the environment. And it's also a crucial issue nowadays, especially in Europe, but also in the US, of course, in Australia. So in this north of the world, in which actually we are trying to, you know, to stop immigrants from the global south. And many times you can see that there has been a greenwashing, what I have called a greenwashing of the anti-immigration discourse. And I think there is a history for this, and I would like to uncover this history. Maybe it's useful for the present and hopefully for the future. Of course, when you speak about nation and nature, it can be a little bit, let's say, tricky in a way, because this is not actually my word. It's from David Blackburn. You know, David Blackburn published a few years ago this amazing book, The Conquest of Nature, about Germany and the nation-state building and the relationship with nature. And according to David Blackburn, when we historians, when we start speaking about nation and nature, it can be a little bit tricky, because we can end up in some kind of naturalization of, you know, the nation, or even we can, you know, end up in speaking about some kind of natural character of some, you know, of people. So, you know, there is a natural character of Italians, Germans, French people, and so on and so forth. This is really scary, as you can imagine, and it's not what I would like to do. I only think that it's really strange that when we think about nation, generally speaking, nature disappears. No, in the nation-state building we consider everything, but we don't consider how much nature has been important in the construction of nature. And by this I don't mean precisely that nature has been used in building an imagined community, no, as Ben Anderson would have said, but I think that it's more kind of different taken. I believe that there is a mutual constituency between nation and nature. So I am not so much interested in the way in which, you know, nature has been used, or you could say exploited, to build a national narrative, but it's maybe the way in which there has been a mutual constituency. So even nature has been able to enter in the national narrative in some way. Maybe it's better if I do some examples here. So for instance, if I think about the Italian nation case study, so in my case, in my book, what I have tried to do is to explore the way in which the discourse about mountains, in my case, was for sure a discourse. So it was, a rhetorical tool to speak about actually other things. This was very clear during the fascist regime, for instance. There was a lot of rhetoric on rural communities, the rural Italian, and it was, of course, a key figure against the urban people. The urban people was, different on many respects. So the celebration of the rural communities was part of, as of the fascist rhetoric of nature. But on the other side, it's true that this rhetoric became also a very material stuff into the mountains. So let's say that the rhetoric about, for instance, modernization, which was a discourse about modernization, then became the tons of concrete in the dams that were, building a hydroelectric monoculture in the Italian Alps. So you see that a discourse became actually a very material discourse in the, and this is the same with the nationalization of landscape. It was a discourse, of course, the idea of the nation state in the Alps, and of course the conflict with the Austrian Empire and other nations across the borders. But this narrative, this discourse was also something very concrete. So for instance, the narrative about the Italian Alps then became embodied in the war memorials after the Great War. So you see a narrative made by bones and by concrete in this case. And you can go ahead. I mean, there was also some kind of, I would say, some kind of narrative which were actually against, in a way, which was pretty much against people. And this was very clear in the southern Apennines. In the unification of the country, there was a discourse about southern Italy as not Europe, but Africa, as they would have said, and it was, of course, racist, and the whole idea of, a border between civilization and non-civilization and so on. But strangely enough, this border was precisely crossing the mountains, the Apennines, because the civil war which followed the unification of the country, I am speaking here of the 1860, 61, and then later on, was a civil war which was fought mainly on the Apennines, on the mountains. And there was this rhetoric about the people from the mountains, this actually poor peasant, from southern Italy, somehow, affected by the very environment in which they were fighting. There was this idea of wilderness. In my book, for instance, I speak about the South Wild Show, the idea of this, wildernification of the people and of the landscape, because I believe that the nationalization of the landscape, well, it was always also nationalization of people, and this was very clear in Italy, but it was clear in many other places. And you can see a sample like that in the last special issue that we edited for Environmental History, in which you have examples from Russia with the Volga River, from Germany with the forest, of course, and from Spain, the politics of water, from France, actually, and UK, with the idea of the making of the perfect, rural landscape. So a comparison between France and the Lake District in UK. Political ecology. Well, I believe that, I don't know, I think that it's not so easy to define political ecology. In a way, this can be the beauty of the field and maybe also the weakness of the field, I don't know. I like to think about political ecology more as a forum, as a common arena, than precisely as a discipline. I think that what is beautiful about political ecology is that you can meet actually in the field of political ecology scholars coming from this different background. I am an historian, but you have of course a strong presence of geographers, especially critical geographers, but you have also sociologists, and you will have also of course STS scholars and even ecocriticists, as you know, Rob Nixon for instance, and I can go ahead. But I think that this is actually what is really attracting me towards political ecology, this kind of freedom. Well, about definition, according to Joan Martinez-Salier, political ecology is the study of environmental distributional conflicts. This is its definition. According to me, I am going for something a little bit broader in a way, and I think that political ecology is the study of nature as if power matters. Of course, saying this definition, I feel already a little bit bad because I am putting nature on another side, and of course one of the basic assumptions of political ecology is actually that nature is always hybrid. There is, according to Castries, there is only social nature, it's not nature and society on the other side. So generally speaking, this is my understanding of political ecology, and my own research on waste in Italy, in Naples, well, it is, as I said, it's coming precisely from some kind of, I would say, activist engagement to the issue. So maybe I should tell you a story, it could work well. So it was 2008, I believe, maybe between December 2008 and January 2009. Naples, Italy was, as always, under a very huge kind of bad garbage crisis at that time, and I was running a PhD course in environmental history, strangely enough, for Italy, and I was very lucky because I had the possibility to invite Caroline Merchant, Donald Worster and John McNeil there, so they were all there for my students. And while we were doing, the Donald Worster class, I remember, we had some trouble. It was very difficult for the students to follow the class because we were pretty much in downtown Naples, and there was a huge demonstration in the street. People shooting and protesting against the garbage situation, and especially the governmental plan to solve it. So I was trying to close the windows and try to make things working. At a certain point, Donald Worster said, we should open the windows because we should let the world speak to us. I mean, this is the whole point of being an environmental historian, no? To let the world speak to us, to be willing to listen to what is happening out there. So I start thinking that I should do something about the waste crisis, and so I started developing a project on waste. And in the end, I was very lucky because I got a Marie Curie fellowship to go to Barcelona and study with Joan Martinez-Salier, what we call landscape of resistance. So my focus on the garbage issue in Naples, of course, is not a technical kind of focus. People keep asking me, so what do you think about the incinerator? Which kind of landfill should we do? I have no clue. I'm not an engineer. I am not even a chemist. I don't know. So my project on garbage waste was mainly a political ecology project trying to look at the, I would say, at the building of resisting communities in the area of Naples, the kind of struggles those people have been doing in the last 20 years, I would say. So also the raising of a new activist knowledge, and I would say the clash between all these and the corporate and governmental plans to manage waste and, I would say, people in a way. So what is interesting for me was, first of all, what I have done was a pretty broad oral history project. I interviewed probably 100 people, and some experts and some activists. But during my research, I discovered that actually the division between these two groups was less clear than I imagined, because many activists were actually experts and some experts were actually activists and so on. So this is what I have been doing on waste. And the other issue that I am trying to work is also the way in which activists has been able to expose a different story about the waste crisis in Campania. I believe that many people were concerned mainly with the trash, the bag of trash in the street of Naples. This was the big concern. This was the scandal. The tourists that were they needed to see the city flooded by garbage. Of course it was a big problem. I am not saying that it was not. But on the other side, the activists were actually uncovering something that was invisible, which was the toxic contamination, which was completely filling the land of Naples and of the region around Naples, Campania. And in this way was, I believe, also exposing the connection between the capitalistic way of production and the way in which this garbage was disposed of. Because the whole issue there was to socialize costs and privatize profits. So the cost of of the disposal of this waste was precisely on the shoulder of the communities. And as in many environmental justice kind of struggles, what happened was that actually the most weak, poor, marginal communities became the target for this policy. So it was very clear that also in Italy the path of least resistance, the idea to target poor, marginal communities was the way in which those corporations, those governmental bodies, and in Italy I should add also the mafia, the Camorra, were acting. But they were wrong. They were wrong because those marginal poor communities react. They reacted indeed. And they built what I have called this resisting community, building a different kind of political landscape, which was a landscape of resistance, in which other knowledge, I would say, something like the street science knowledge that Jason Corbun has talked about in his book, well, this kind of street science, popular knowledge has been created. And this is the kind of work that I have been trying to do in political ecology. Regarding the involvement with activists and, I would say social and environmental struggles, well, I am very open on this respect. I believe that there is a political commitment and you must be aware of this. So I am completely committed to this. And sometimes, you can say that this is somehow, jeopardizing my objectivity as a scientist. But I would argue, first of all, what is this objectivity that you are talking about? I don't think that the people saying that the incinerators are perfect and the landfill work perfectly fine, they are objective. They are just serving other interests. So you need to make your choice. And I am not saying anything new about this. I am just referring to the strong objectivity approach by Sandra Harding, and this kind also the generally speaking the feminist kind of approach of political ecology can be very helpful in this respect. I am not saying that I support activists whatever they say. I am not in this respect. I have a critical voice, but on the other hand I feel to be completely engaged in this kind of struggle, because the struggle for social and environmental justice is a struggle in which I believe, and I don't see any problem to be a scholar and to be also somebody who do what he believes. I remember that when I was in doing my PhD, somebody told me that you should be objective, you should never mix your feelings, your ideas, your passions with what you are doing. I don't buy this. I don't think that to be a good scholar you need to be narcotized, like a zombie. I think that a good scholar can be alive, and so I try to stay alive, at least for a while. Again, of course, this is one of the areas in which environmental historians have contributed in a way, also strongly. I mean, at the beginning I said that there is nothing, but maybe I should be clearer on this respect. So if you think of probably the most influential book in environmental history, at least for a long time, probably we would say that Alfred Crosby's books especially the Colombian exchange, but maybe also ecological imperialism have been very influential. I think that even my daughter at school, they are learning something about the Colombian exchange nowadays, you know, in high school. So I think that we were able to convey something to the general public, to the historiography, you know, in a very large sense. Of course, this was a lot about migration. It was the encounter between Europeans and, you know, other, you know, Americas especially, and then also Australia and so on. But on the other side, there was something about this kind of history that was pretty much related to the age of discoveries. No? It was pretty much related to the age of the first encounters. This is also very strong in Jared Diamond's kind of discourse about, you know, the making of the, maybe as Jared Diamond would say, you know, the making of the fates of nations, or whatever you want to call it. So I am more interested in something a little bit different. So I am not looking at the age of the discoveries, but I am more looking at the age of mass migration. So let's say from the 19th century and then to the 20th century. So my idea is that it is not only the conquistadores or Her Majesty, you know, subjects, you know, people going around with an army, with a flag and so on. They were not the only one making, you know, the neo-Europes that Alfred Crosby has been talking about. I believe that also millions of Europeans, many times, you know, poor Europeans, poor workers, traveling between Europe and other parts of the world, but mainly the Americas and Australia, I think that they were able to, in a way, to shape the world as we know it now. So my interest in the history of migration is precisely to recover this hidden, in a way, story of relationship between people who moved and the landscape where they arrived. By the way, I don't mean only to speak about, you know, the shaping of nature from immigrants in a very, I would say, you know, one-way direction. So immigrants arriving in a place and shaping the landscape around there. I believe that there was also some kind of feedback from the environment to the immigrants. So I believe that the bodies of immigrants, for instance, were pretty much affected by the encounter with the new environment. And this is very clear, especially in the, I would say, in the connection with work. And I believe that we need to be very attentive to the issue of work, especially in relations with immigrants. Really, work is the place in which this mediation, this dialectic relationship between humans and nature was happening. And it's not by chance that when I need to talk about the environmental history of migration, many times I start my little talk speaking about the Triangle Factory fire in New York City. So it's an industrial accident happened at the beginning of the 20th century in New York. So it's a fire in a factory where I believe 140 something workers were killed. Many of them Italians, and most, I think pretty much all of them immigrants. So sometimes people are a little bit surprised. So you're talking about, you know, environmental history of migration, and then you speak to us, you talk to us about an industrial, you know, accident. Well, I believe that, you know, the capitalistic organization of labor in a factory is precisely what I am interested in it. Because capital, I mean, you know, David Harvey said that capitalism is not producing an ecology, capitalism is an ecology. And so I believe that looking precisely at the, for instance, the way in which the labor is organized in a factory and the price paid by immigrants to the capitalistic organization of labor is part of a project on environmental history of migration. Of course, I have also other kind of field in which I am interested. For instance, I am very interested in the way in which immigrant communities were able to look at, to see, and to activate the urban commons in the American cities, for instance. Just to give you an example, think about Italian immigrants and the way in which they related to garbage again, must be my obsession. So to garbage again, they were able to use garbage to produce protein. So they were, you know, raising pigs or goats in the city. And I would argue that the sanitization of the US cities was sure a project about, you know, sanitizing the city, but was also a governmental project to cut the possibility of self-sufficiency for these people. Or you can think about the way in which Italians and other Southern European immigrants were perceiving, thinking, and I would say, you know, shaping actually their backyards. For the American, and I mean for the Anglo-Saxon, you know, WASP immigrants, of course the backyard must be the lawn, the green lawn. Well, for Italian immigrants and for other Southern European immigrants, the backyard was a place to plant vegetables and to raise chickens and rabbits. And this was very, very unpolite. You know, it was terrible. They were spoiling all the posh of the area. This was very fun in a way, because I have also found a diary of an Italian official traveling around the US in the 1920s, and he was very enthusiastic about the Italian communities there, and he wrote in this diary, oh my God, the only thing that is really bad is that this Italian, they cannot grow flowers, but only, you know, zucchini and tomatoes. Why they do that? You know, they are ruining the good reputation of Italians. So what is wrong about tomatoes? Why tomatoes are not nature and flower are nature? This is not something, and again, this is a political issue. During the big strike in the Iron Range, in the mining communities in Minnesota, in the Iron Range, the Italian miners, they were the only ones who were able to survive because they were so self-sufficient. And you can see why the corporation was pushing so much to have the lawn instead of the vegetable. Maybe it was not just an aesthetic issue, maybe it was a political issue to make people dependent from a salary and not self-sufficient. And I can go ahead and tell other stories about this, but I don't know if it's interesting. But there is another story about, again, urban commons and immigrants. We are in Chicago. It's actually from a novel. We are in Chicago, and there is this Italian immigrant, Zio Griddu, from Sicily, as you can imagine. Zio Griddu, and it was a very bad time, very hard time in Chicago. You know, people were very poor, and so we're in the Italian neighborhood. They were actually living, you know, gathering food pretty much, eating, you know, weeds or eating even apparently rats and so on. So at a certain point, Zio Griddu was very lucky. He found some money in the street, and so he decided, you know, he needed to make a decision. Should I buy food or should I do something else with this money? And so he decided to buy a ticket, a tram ticket, and to go to a different neighborhood in Chicago, a rich white neighborhood. You know, I don't know why, it's not clear. But anyway, Zio Griddu took the tram and he arrived in this rich white neighborhood. And while he was roaming around, he was able to spot a field completely filled with wild artichoke. And so he started collecting this wild artichoke. And at a certain point, a white lady came up from a home and said, it started yelling at him, and they said, oh my God, no, Zio Griddu thought, I am going to jail. They found me, and the lady instead said, okay, thank you for, you know, cleaning the weeds, how much do you want? So Zio Griddu said, okay, finally I got my America, you know, free food and money. Well, this story is interesting because it's precisely two different ways of looking, no, at nature. For the white lady, those were, you know, weeds. It was, you know, there was no use for them. For Zio Griddu was food. And so of course it's a story, just a story. But this is the kind of narratives and the kind of approach that I am trying to do with my research on immigrants. And as I said, I am also working a bit, on the greenwashing of the anti-immigration discourse. I don't know if you are aware of this, but in the US lately, in the last, I don't know, few years, there has been some kind of greenwashing of the anti-immigration discourse. You see, you know, this kind of network like the Carrying Capacity Network, the Take the Break Network, and of course the very, you know, right-wing think tanks and so on. They were trying to make the argument that we need to stop the immigration because it's dangerous for the environment. We don't need all this, you know, Latin American, Southern American, Mexicans entering in the US because it's really bad for the environment. There is a very awful documentary made about the crossing of the border between Mexico and Arizona, and the whole documentary is trying to make the point that the Mexicans, and generally speaking the illegal immigrants, they were littering the national park. This is the big issue. Well, the documentary forgot to say that there are also a lot of bodies of people dying trying to enter in the US. So it's not. So this greenwashing of the anti-immigration discourse as a story, because it was very common to say that, for instance, Italian immigrants, they were very bad towards the environment. They were unable to perceive the beauty of wilderness. They were just looking for new land to be cultivated, as I said before. They were killing every animals around, and there are a lot of stories about that. And again, there was this idea that only WASP immigrants, they were the one able to, to appreciate nature. I have found an article in a newspaper in California, and according to this article, the article was from 1912, there was a park in La Corona, in a small town in California, and the park was completely destroyed. And according to the author of the article, this was because the park was in the Italian and Mexican area of the city. And so the article said, okay, the only way to make the Italians and Mexicans, take care of the park would be to plant potatoes in the park. And again, you might wonder, so what is wrong about planting potatoes in a park? And in Europe, the greenwashing of the anti-immigration discourse is still rather weak. I think that there was some attempt to do that, but I believe this is still an hypothesis, but I believe that I would say that the environmentalist movement in Europe has been so strongly connected to some kind of leftist culture that it will be very difficult to exploit that kind of of narratives and for different purpose. But I have found something very strange, for instance, from this very right-wing parties going around Europe, in Greece, in other part of Europe, and sometimes you can find some argument. For instance, the idea that immigrants will raise too much the consumption in the countries where they are arriving, so it's good for the environment not to have them. So maybe we need to be ready to answer, to challenge this kind of claim, and to maybe to make the point that there is nothing unnatural about moving around the world, and actually what is really unnatural is the political borders, right? So the Environmental Humanities Laboratory was founded 2 years ago, thanks to a very generous donation, a private donation from a Swedish entrepreneur. And this donation was matched by internal funds from KTH, from the Royal Institute of Technology. The whole idea of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory was to try to mobilize the humanities around new kind of questions, and especially trying to interact with, I would say, on one hand, hard sciences, if you wish to call in this way, or anyway with other kind of disciplines, but also with the societal challenges that are going on nowadays. So this was pretty much at the basis of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory. The laboratory is based at the Division of History of Science, Technology and the Environment. So as you can see, it has been pretty much connected, rooted in the history in a way, and somehow, especially with environmental history, history of technology, and STS studies, which are the main areas in which our division has been strong for a long time. So the way in which we define the lab, our lab, is essentially that the lab aims to be a post-disciplinary environment. The idea of post-disciplinary environment, I believe, at least this is my idea, is that we don't want in a way to lose our disciplinary identity. It's not the point. The point is that you can be very solid, very rooted in your disciplinary identity and background, but you might aim to find a different arena to share your knowledge and also your, I would say, scholarly practices with people coming from these different disciplines. And I think that, I moved there 1 year ago, so I was not there when the lab was founded then, but I believe that the idea to call this center, a lab, a laboratory, is also a very nice idea. Many times people, ask me, so what are you talking about? We are putting together, first of all, environmental with humanities, and then the humanities with the lab. It's really weird. I think it's precisely what we are looking for. Isn't it the Anthropocene in a way? Because the Anthropocene is precisely this hybrid of human and what we would call nature somehow, the environment, and then is a gigantic lab, is a gigantic experiment that nobody knows how it will end actually. And I stress the idea of the lab because what we are really keen to do is to experiment. But what is different maybe with other kind of lab, at least we don't pretend at all to be antiseptic with towards the rest of the world. Actually, one of the main issues of this lab is to be open, to be contaminated. It's the contrary. What is really important for us is that all our experiments must be contaminated with what is happening out there. So, and of course it's very difficult that our experiment can be duplicated and you will find the same result as in the scientific lab. But you can try and you can do the same experiment, and we really hope that you will find something different actually. And so this is probably different from the normal ways in which people think about a lab. So what we are doing, I think that we have been working a lot on outreaching, try to communicate with a non-scholarly kind of audience. So I can make a few examples. We are very proud that this year we have been doing a film festival together with CHE, the best name for a university center, isn't it? CHE, which is the Center for Culture, History and the Environment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so together with them we have been doing Tales from Planet Earth Film Festival. And then we have also, and this film festival has been very important because we were able to involve hundreds of people, especially young people in the film festival, bringing their filmmakers and activists from all over the world, from India, from South Africa, from Brazil and so on. And actually the main topic, the main, I would say, theme of the film festival was activism and movies, connecting, activism and movies. Another thing that we have been doing, again, trying to connect, to outreach with people outside the academic world, has been probably this exhibition that we are working together with the Rachel Carson Center and the CHE, again, in Wisconsin, the Anthropocene exhibition. We just did the Anthropocene Cabinet of Curiosities Slam in Madison, Wisconsin, which was amazing. I think one of the best conferences I have ever been. Very funny, very engaging. And so the idea of the Anthropocene Cabinet of Curiosities Slam was that people had to propose an object which could, symbolize, could be a metaphor for the Anthropocene. Of course, what is an object is kind of, matter of discussion, because according to somebody, the object is a very precise object, like the monkey wrench. According to somebody else, was, for instance, a movie about, atomic experiments in the US. So you see very different kind of object. Why this is an outreaching experiment again? Because we will do the exhibition here in Germany and then a traveling exhibition. And so again, it's an attempt to engage with a broader public. That said, I would say that we are also, of course, engaged in research. So we are very lucky because we were able to have a new European project together again with the Rachel Carson Center in Munich and with Leeds University. We will run a new PhD program in environmental humanities, and we are so proud that we will do that. Before that, my center, the Environmental Humanities Lab, is also part of the Entitled network. Entitled is the European Network in Political Ecology, which is another PhD program, European PhD program funded by the European Union. And again, I think it's very nice that our lab is part of these two different, teaching and researching program. both, in the same kind of European framework. So the environmental humanities and the political ecology one. And just to finish maybe about the lab, I might mention also this new program that we are running. It's just a seed grant program from the International Social Science Council, and we are trying to do a project on just sustainability. We are very happy because, again, our main idea is to look at the ways in which social and environmental struggles have been producing knowledge for transformation. Because according to us, knowledge for transformation is not created, in a scientific panel. Let's face it, Rosa Parks, Chico Mendes, or the Subcomandante Marcos, they didn't submit a project proposal to make social changes. They fight, right? And so I believe that as academics, maybe if we are looking for social changes, maybe we should look at where the struggles are and try to grasp which kind of knowledge has been produced there, and try to see, of course, the limits, but also the great possibilities to scale it up and try to reflect and to explore about this. This is what we will try to do if in the end we will get the big grant. But even if not, we are very happy that we are part of this endeavor, and we will anyway work in this direction. We have also a very strong commitment to urban political ecology. There is a website that has been put together by one of our researchers, Eric Enstrom. It's based at KTH in our lab, but also in Stanford and Cape Town. You see the kind of international connection, and is working precisely on building a urban political ecologies, especially of African cities. So hopefully we will have a big conference on this in the end of next year of 2015, right? And let me add just one thing, maybe useful also because we are here at the Anthropocene campus. Of course, I really believe that the Anthropocene can be a very useful concept now, especially because it's producing this kind of event in which people from different disciplines is willing to share knowledge, to be in touch, to start some kind of conversation. But the Anthropocene can be also very, I would say, tricky concept, because, there is a huge risk of depoliticization of the environment. And, face it, we are speaking about a huge social and ecological crisis, and according to the narrative of the Anthropocene, the problem is the anthropos. It's not the capitalism, it's not private property, but it's the anthropos. And I am always asking the same question: where is this anthropos? It's really hard to find this, collective actor. I believe that, class, gender, race still matter in the Anthropocene. This is what I have tried to convey in my lecture here last night, when I said that the best metaphor for the Anthropocene is the Titanic. Not because it's a tale about a huge disaster, not because it's a tale about, failing technology or iceberg fighting, striking back, nature won. It's not the point. Titanic is a good metaphor because Titanic tells us that class matters in a very specific way. 75% of the people in the first class survived, and only 25% of the people in the third class. So, of course, for class I mean also gender, race, historical inequalities, but for the sake of the metaphor, of the first and third class, maybe we can say that the Anthropocene is an interesting concept, but still needs, some critical voice. And I am here for this. Well, this is a very difficult question. Historians are not good to talk about the future. We generally talk about the past. We are even in trouble with the present, generally. No, but I take the chance, actually. I think it's an important question. Well, first of all, I believe that it's kind of scary to talk about this. There is a lot of talking about this apocalyptic, dystopian kind of future. A very interesting critical geographer, Eric Swingedon, wrote a great paper that I think the title was Apocalypse Forever. And I share many of his thoughts actually, and even this one. So I think that, as Zizek once said, for us it's easier to talk and to think about the end of the world as we know it than about the end of capitalism. So I wonder if we might be we can have a little bit of hope and see a future in which capitalism can have at least some alternative, no? And I believe that what is really needed is precisely to believe that there is an alternative out there. And I really would like to see the future as I would say, quest for alternative. I am not, on some respect, I am an old-fashioned guy, and I have my own personal and political, beliefs and so on. But on the other side, I am not looking for an easy answer to the problem of the future. I don't believe that in some book written in the 19th century, for instance, I don't want to mention anything, but I don't think that you can find in a German philosopher or the answer for the future. But I think that you can find very good question in that book and in that philosopher, and I'm speaking about Marx, for instance, about the future. And I think that if you ask the right questions, then you can find your own answer. And probably, it's not the one that, it's written in some book, it's not the one that's been already, tried and went pretty bad. But I think that we can imagine something new. And I am a kind of positive in this respect. I think that there is a lot of energy. I really think that, what is happening with the Occupy movement, the Indignados, this raising of a new generation of people ready to put their bodies, in the street and, to use their bodies challenging this kind of power. Well, this can be a nice way to imagine a different future. After all, there is, the new book that Naomi Klein just published, This Changes Everything. And I hope that this changes everything, and of course for the best.